So Jay, one of the things I think that we're spending a lot of time at TransUnion thinking about is how we can aggressively help invest in the types of things that are really about people-based marketing, identity-driven marketing. And I know it's something you guys think a lot about as well. And our belief is that, as the time goes on, marketers are going to continue to expect more of that precision marketing, that people-based, whatever word you want to put on there, that's going to continue to be more and more important. Yet we're doing this at a time where there's clearly a lot of great change, right? There's a lot of things in flux, and whether that's driven by technology changes, whether that's driven by privacy regulation changes, there's a lot in motion. And I'm interested in your perspective on, we're having this conversation at an interesting point in time. And what's your perspective on how these different technology and kind of privacy and consent legislation movements are having an impact on the business and how that might impact things over the next several months and years?
Yeah, I think that, and you're right. We talk a lot about privacy, and as with anything, I guess, transformative within the industry. But I think the various legislations or legislative proposals that are out there, along with the various groups that are, have formed movements, whether it's the surveillance capitalism, which is a really, really inaccurate name to all of this, they're going to have a tremendous impact. And I don't think we know what it looks like in the end. I think we have so many different proposals out there. We have the sandbox proposal, and then there's a lot of birds names that are out there. And I think that I think the broader thing that I would probably say is, I think we will look back 2 years from now and say, and consumers will say, I wish we just had cookies again. And I wish because I could delete those, and I didn't have to log in and click accept on every site I go to. And so I think that what we're moving toward is a regulated environment that is a little bit like Sarbanes-Oxley, where yes, we may prevent the worst use case from happening again, but the day-to-day use cases are going to just be much, much harder to implement and aren't going to necessarily do a lot of protecting.
Yeah. And you think a lot about, as you mentioned, their consumer perception, right? I mean, is there something we can be doing because I'm with you. Like, I think a lot of consumers don't have the fear that many think they do. They certainly want to make sure their data is treated safely. They want to make sure we have rights to, put the limits on data use. But I think most consumers, if presented the choice, actually appreciate how the data and identity that underpins so many of our experiences makes life easier.
Yeah, so I don't want to be served ads for senior diapers, right? Because that's just not very relevant to me yet. And so I think that I agree with you. I think that if unaided, I think consumers would rather see ads that are relevant to them than they would see, because you're going to see ads either way. You just have to decide whether you want to see ads that may interest you. Now, we don't do a perfect job of targeting, and sometimes we do a better job of bothering, right, or pestering. And so, yeah, I think there are some things that the industry could do, and I wish the industry would have stepped up maybe 2 years ago. And this is a little bit of the tragedy of the commons, kind of like the overfishing component, where it's like, well, since no one's doing anything about it, I'm going to get mine. But the reality is had we eliminated, for instance, SKU level retargeting, so the exact thing I put in my cart and didn't use is now not on my Instagram 3 minutes later, right? I think that would have been a really easy give that the industry could have done. I think, for instance, maybe we say no retargeting within 24 hours. I don't know exactly what the answers are, but I think there was a lot of things that we could have done that would have eliminated the perception of being tracked and followed. And I also agree with you that I think the majority of consumers don't really know or care. I think it is a vocal minority that rouses the rest of the group up. And the reality is what this is forcing everyone to do is get their first party data in order, right? And to really get sophisticated, when before we really didn't know the name of the person we were targeting very often. Now we will.
Yeah, interesting. Well, it's an interesting perspective that I think has some certainly merit. And listen, let's transition a little bit to the other part of this equation that I get asked about all the time is measurement, right? And quite clearly, the way that we have built up the industry with the data scientists that are focused on measurement in the space is they've come used to a certain set of signals and availability of data that quite clearly is going to be different. I don't necessarily know better or worse, but certainly different. Okay, so that's what I'm curious from your perspective, right? Which is, what do you think happens in measurement in the coming years and months? And are we going to have a fundamental change? And will it indeed be worse in your mind?
Yeah, so I think that the tools we will be given will be probably worse. I think that the majority of marketers today don't use, I think, are given this professional auger to dig a hole, and the hole that they dig only needs to is generally only big enough for a sprinkler head. And so I think that most marketers today, there's so many that are still stuck on last click or even last touch if they're looking at view through. There's very few marketers that we meet with today, at least before we start working with them, are really focused on incrementality, and incrementality both by channel and by message. There's so many different ways to measure lift. And so I do believe that as some of these tools are shifted, we will be not unable to measure lift and incrementality, but it will be a little bit more challenging. And it might be a little more broad. And I think that my hope would be, let's say the tools never changed. 10 years from now, I would hope that 80% of marketers instead of 20% of marketers were really advanced. I think this just maybe slows that progression.
Yeah, interesting point. Now that's some interesting impacts there. We'll be interested to see how that evolves for sure. Let me ask you one last thing. So given, as we've talked about, like, these changes are on the horizon, right? And we know they're coming, but in many ways they're not yet here, right? And so, but your clients are undoubtedly asking you about them now. Exactly. And so I'm curious, what are you telling them? Are you saying change strategies, stick with strategies? What's the approach right now as your marketer clients call you and say, what do we do?
Yeah, so if we're going to take all the chocolate out of the house as of 2 months from now, I'm not going to necessarily stop eating chocolate today. I'm going to eat it while I can. And so I think we're going to use the tools we can while we have them. But in the meantime, and on a parallel path, we're telling clients to prepare. And there's a number of things that we can prepare for regardless of what happens, right? I think getting our first party data in order as a marketer is a no-brainer regardless of what happens. I think getting and shifting and becoming very comfortable with incrementality as the metric is a good thing regardless of what happens. Now, the outcomes of whether it's legislation or IAB initiatives or whatever it may be, they're so diverse and there's so many that could occur. I don't think there's any one that's sensible to prepare for right now, but I think understanding the span of options is important, and then how those impact. And so again, I think incrementality and first party data in and of itself, of course, starting to work with publishers better, but even CPRA, for example, it actually harms publishers, I think, and we don't have to get into that today, but unless you're a big tech platform.
Jay, as we talk about all the different things that are moving, I mean, one of the things that's been more recently talked about is Apple's changes to IDFA, right? And what signals we as advertisers are going to get from what is a massive marketplace of mobile devices. I mean, that seems to have a huge potential impact. What's your thoughts on how that plays out?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Apple has taken a sneakily creative way to approaching privacy. And I think by and large, people in the industry agree that privacy is probably secondary to Apple's primary motive, which is to beat Google and to eliminate the need for the open web in favor of the app ecosystem. And so, but privacy happens to be a really good story to tell to get us on the way to achieving that. I think that, again, we go back to, do you want to see ads that may have relevance or ads that you truly have no idea are going to be relevant? I think, there are so many apps, especially the gaming apps, that must measure really carefully in order to get a good ROI. And so I think, like with everything, there are unintended consequences. We're not sure exactly what those will be, but I think, not having Safari cookies at all, and with Apple probably not likely getting on board with some sort of federated learning API or anything else, And not having an IDFA in place makes Apple's devices a wasteland. And I will tell you one thing. I think, Apple was one of the 4 named in the House Judiciary Committee's big tech report. The last thing I would want is the other 3 going and testifying against me, right? I think it's fine when there's 4 and they're in it together, but I think Apple needs to be really careful because the way they're building this really shuts everybody out.